Okay, so let's continue with the concept of marginal thinking, which we have already done earlier, and specifically when we examined how you would maximize your utility. And what we did earlier was to say when you have a certain marginal utility, what you do is, you look at how much marginal utility do I get per dollar spent. So if the good is X, we would say the marginal utility of X over the price of X. That term tells you how much utility do you get per dollar spent. And when you compare that to the marginal utility per dollar spent on Y, and the marginal utility per dollar spent on X is greater than the marginal utility per dollar spent on Y, then it makes more sense to purchase X. So in this case, it's economically more rational to purchase X. And that is something we already did earlier. So let's just review a little bit again. So consider the following example of cookies consumption, noting that the more cookies you eat, the happier you are, but that your happiness increases at diminishing returns. And I think I also already introduced earlier the concept of diminishing marginal utility. So essentially, when you go out and you have like a couple of milkshakes, you probably feel that the first milkshake gives you the greatest satisfaction or the highest utility. Well, then if you have another one, yeah, it's still good, but it's not as great as the first one. And likewise, if you move to a third or fourth milkshake, the extra utility that you get from each extra milkshake becomes less and less. And that is what we call the law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility. Okay, so that is an important axiom in economics. So now let's apply it. So we have cookies, and we know if we have no cookies, of course we don't get any utility, but if we have one, we get a total utility of 4. Well, if we have 2, it's even better. Our total utility goes up from 4 to 7. And if we eat 3 cookies, we feel like, oh wow, we get a total utility of 9. And if we have 4, we get a total utility of 10. So now what matters is the marginal utility, or the incremental utility in this case. So if you can increase cookies consumption from 0 to 1, then your total utility goes up by 4. So the marginal utility of the first cookie is 4. Then if you have a second cookie, then the extra utility that you get from the first to the second is another plus 3. If you have a third cookie, then the marginal utility of the third cookie is the increase in utility from 7 to 9, which is plus 2. And if you have a fourth cookie, you still get only an extra utility of 1 because you probably already get a little bit tired of the cookies. Okay, so the marginal utility is 4 from 0 to 1, and then 3, and then 2, and then 1. So now let's take a look at the cost. If let's say each cookie costs $2, well then if you have no cookie, you don't pay anything, your total cost is 0. But then with every unit of consumption, your total cost goes up by 2. So total cost goes up by from 0 to 2, from 2 to 4, 2 cookies, $6 for 3 cookies, $8 for 4 cookies. So now what is the marginal or the incremental cost? Well, from 0 to 2, So that is an increase by 2. Then from 2 to 4, that's another increase by 2. From 4 to 6 plus 2, and from 6 to 8 plus 2. So here we have something that we call constant marginal cost. So the constant marginal cost is always 2. I'll just omit the dollar sign here, so just forget about it. So it's always $2. Okay, so now assuming rationality, how many cookies will you eat? And how much is your total cost, and how much is your total net utility? Okay, let's do it again, similar to what we did earlier. Shall I have the first cookie? So, and by the way, so this logic here, that doesn't apply now because we don't compare two goods. We only focus on one good. So, but it's a very similar thinking. It is still marginal thinking. Okay, so how many cookies will you eat? So, will you eat the first cookie? Well, you will eat the first cookie, yes, because if you increase your consumption from 0 to 1, you feel I get an extra utility, a marginal utility of 4. But you have to pay only 2. So your willingness to pay, your reservation price is much higher than what you actually do have to pay. So you buy the first cookie, make here buy. Why? Because the marginal utility of 4 of the first cookie is greater than the marginal cost, MC of 2. Well, do you have the second cookie? Yes, you have the second cookie because the marginal utility of 3 is still greater than the marginal cost. So you buy the second, buy, because again the marginal utility is greater than the marginal cost. What about a third cookie? Well, the third cookie gives you an extra utility of 2 because it increases your total utility from 7 to 9, so the marginal utility is 2, and you also have to pay 2. So you're technically indifferent, but economists, they like to say, in the case of indifference, we buy things. So in this case, we buy because the third cookie gives us the same marginal utility as we have in marginal cost, because the marginal cost is always 2. Okay, so do we have a fourth cookie? Well, the marginal utility of the fourth cookie is only $1. So, yeah, it would be nice to have another cookie, but since our willingness to pay, the utility that we get from it, because that utility we only value with $1, there's no way we'll get the fourth cookie if we have to pay 2 for it. So the fourth cookie is, not buy, because the marginal utility is now less than the marginal cost. So now what we do is, and this is an important result already in economics, we expand consumption as long as the marginal utility is greater than the marginal cost. So we can write that maybe an economically rational individual expands consumption as long as the marginal utility from consumption is greater than the marginal cost. And of course that is only one condition, you also need to have the money, obviously, so there's also budget constraint. But for this example, we assume we can buy as many as we wanted to if we want to, so we don't have really a budget constraint in this example. And this example was only used in order to highlight that your utility maximization is reached whenever the marginal utility equals marginal cost. So I'll stop here, and in the next slide, I will draw it, and then I will also answer the question, how much is your total utility? Well, if we buy 3 cookies, we know that our total utility is 9, and our total cost is 6. So we will have a net utility of 3. But I will also graphically visualize that on the next slide.